Picture this. It's 1847, and the American frontier is still this vast, largely unmapped expanse where a man could disappear completely, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. In Missouri, the drought that year wasn't just bad weather. It was the kind of bone-dry, crop-killing, soul-crushing disaster that could erase 3 generations of back-breaking work in a single growing season. James Wheeler stood in what used to be his cornfield, watching the wind carry away topsoil that his grandfather had cleared by hand in 1802. Think about that for a moment. 85 years of family sweat and dreams, literally blowing away in the wind. The irony? Wheeler was about to become one of the richest men in California, but standing there in that dead field, he was just another failed farmer with calloused hands and empty pockets. Now, every family has that one relative who fills your head with wild stories. For James Wheeler, it was his uncle Marcus, E.M.E., a man who tried his hand at geology before the bottle got the better of him. Marcus Wheeler had spent years in Pennsylvania coal country, learning to read rock formations like most people read newspapers. He'd fill young James's ears with tales of stones that could tell you where water flowed, where metals hid, where the earth kept its secrets. "Rocks don't lie, boy," Marcus would say, usually 3 drinks into an evening. "They just don't speak English." Most practical folks would dismiss this as the ramblings of a drunk. James Wheeler filed it away in his mind, never imagining that one day his uncle's seemingly useless knowledge would make him legendary. The decision to head west wasn't particularly dramatic. When you've got nothing left to lose, the choice becomes remarkably simple. Wheeler sold what little remained, some farm equipment, a few head of livestock, and joined up with the Thornton wagon train. 17 families, all chasing the same dream that was pulling hundreds of thousands of Americans toward California and Oregon. But here's where Wheeler started earning his nickname. While other men focused on practical concerns, hollow water barrels, ammunition counts, oxen health, colosate, Wheeler kept wandering off to examine rock formations. Picture the scene. The wagon train stops for the evening. Families are setting up camps, children are being fed, and there's Wheeler, scrambling up some cliff face with a battered journal, sketching geological features by fading daylight. "Wrong way, Wheeler," they started calling him. The name stuck because Wheeler had this habit of suggesting alternate routes based on what the rocks told him about water sources ahead. Most wagon masters ignored him. They had maps, after all. Official routes. Wheeler just had his uncle's drunken theories about reading stone. The Comanche attack at Palo Duro Canyon changed everything. Now, if you've never been to the Texas Panhandle, Palo Duro is this massive gash in the earth, 800 feet deep in places, carved by water over millions of years. It's beautiful country, but it's also perfect for an ambush. The Comanche knew this terrain like most people know their own backyard. When the attack came at dawn on September 23rd, it wasn't the Hollywood version you might imagine. No bugle calls, no dramatic speeches, just sudden, efficient violence that scattered the Thornton wagon train like leaves in a tornado. Wheeler found himself separated from the main group, alone except for his mule, his rifle, and that geology journal that had earned him so much mockery. 3 days later, nearly dead from thirst, Wheeler encountered Chief Standing Bear of the Ute Nation. Now, this is where the story takes an interesting turn. Standing Bear wasn't looking for trouble. His people were dealing with their own pressures from westward expansion. But he recognized something in Wheeler, maybe the same desperation that was driving native tribes deeper into increasingly marginal lands. The education Wheeler received over the next 6 weeks was worth more than any university degree. Standing Bear taught him to read the subtle signs that reveal water in desert country, the types of vegetation that indicate underground streams, how animal trails converge on hidden springs, the way certain rock formations channel and store rainfall. In exchange, Wheeler helped Standing Bear understand the mindset of the encroaching settlers. It was an unlikely partnership, but frontier survival often created these temporary alliances between groups that circumstances had made enemies. November brought early blizzards. the kind that can kill you in hours if you're caught unprepared. Wheeler was 60 miles north of the established trails when the weather turned deadly. Following Ute wisdom about reading landscape, he sought shelter in what appeared to be a narrow canyon system, Rome's O, the kind of place most travelers would avoid as a potential trap. The cave, Wheeler found, probably saved his life that night. But when he built his campfire to stay warm, the firelight revealed something that would change American mining history. Veins of gold in the rock face so pure, so visible, that Wheeler later described them as looking like frozen lightning caught in stone. Here's what separates James Wheeler from the thousands of other prospectors who found gold in California. His reaction wasn't celebration. It was calculated paranoia. Wheeler had learned enough from his experiences with the Thornton wagon train, the Comanche attack, and Standing Bear's lessons about survival to understand that finding gold was just the beginning of his problems. For 6 weeks, Wheeler didn't leave that canyon system. While blizzards raged above, he methodically mapped 17 separate gold deposits, each one rich enough to make a man wealthy. But Wheeler was thinking bigger than personal wealth. Using techniques learned from Standing Bear, he created false camps, misleading trail markers, even fake mine shafts designed to confuse anyone who might follow his tracks. Picture Wheeler during those solitary weeks, a failed farmer transforming himself into something entirely new. He was developing the systematic approach that would eventually create the most successful mining cooperative in California history. Each night by firelight, he filled hidden caches with gold nuggets, some as large as quail eggs, while his mind worked out strategies for protecting and profiting from his discovery. The transformation was complete by spring. James Wheeler, Wrong Way Wheeler, the failed farmer who couldn't read weather signs well enough to save his crops, had become something the frontier had never seen before. A prospector who understood that finding gold was only 20% of the challenge. The other 80% was keeping it, developing it, and turning discovery into lasting wealth. But Wheeler had learned something else during those winter months that would prove even more valuable than gold. He'd learned that survival on the frontier required cooperation across boundaries that civilized society considered permanent. The lessons from Standing Bear, the insights from his uncle's geological knowledge, the hard-won understanding of human nature gained from watching the Thornton wagon train's social dynamics, all of this was about to make Wheeler's Strike the most unusual mining camp in American history. Spring of 1848 was coming, and with it, Wheeler would face challenges that would make surviving Comanche attacks and winter blizzards seem simple by comparison. Because once word got out about gold, that pure, that accessible, Wheeler wouldn't just be dealing with nature anymore. He'd be dealing with human greed on a scale that could destroy everything he'd built. The question was, could a failed farmer from Missouri outsmart some of the most ruthless business minds in America? Spring of 1848 brought James Wheeler to Sacramento with exactly enough gold to change his life, if he played it smart. And this is where Wheeler's story gets really interesting, because what he did next shows you just how much that winter in the canyon had transformed a simple Missouri farmer into something approaching a strategic genius. Wheeler didn't rush to the assayer's office like most prospectors. Instead, he spent 3 days watching, learning how the gold market actually worked in California. He saw miners getting cheated by buyers who understood global markets, while the prospectors understood only pickaxes and pans. Wheeler decided he wouldn't be one of them. His first move was brilliant in its simplicity. Wheeler filed claims under 7 different names, a trick he'd learned from his Mexican war sergeant, who'd used multiple identities to acquire Texas land grants after the war. Think about this. While other miners were fighting over single claims, Wheeler was quietly establishing legal control over vast territories, all perfectly legitimate under territorial law. But Wheeler's real genius was in recruitment. He didn't just hire muscle or standard mining labor. He assembled what you might call the most unlikely team in frontier history. First was Chen Wei, a Cantonese merchant who'd arrived in California 2 years earlier, with an understanding of international gold markets that put most American businessmen to shame. Chen Wei could calculate London gold prices in his head while negotiating in 3 languages. He became Wheeler's connection to global markets, ensuring that Wheeler's gold reached buyers willing to pay premium prices for the exceptional purity. Then there was Maria Consuela Vasquez, whose family had been mining silver in Zacatecas for 4 generations. Maria knew things about extracting precious metals from difficult terrain that American miners were still learning through trial and error. Her expertise would prove invaluable when Wheeler's operation expanded beyond simple placer mining into hard rock extraction. But perhaps Wheeler's most important recruit was Tobias Morrison, Black Tom. Everyone called him Black Tom, a freed slave whose engineering genius would revolutionize desert mining. Morrison had learned hydraulic engineering, maintaining plantation irrigation systems in Georgia. In California, he would design water reclamation systems that made profitable mining possible in areas other operations had written off as too dry. Here's what made Wheeler's team revolutionary. In 1848 California, you simply didn't see Chinese merchants, Mexican mining experts, freed slaves, and white farmers working as equals. The social barriers were considered as permanent as mountain ranges. Wheeler's operation proved they weren't. The secret held for exactly 73 days. Wheeler had been careful, his team discreet, but gold purity levels like Wheeler's strike was producing don't stay hidden forever. A drunk assayer in Sacramento let slip news of ore samples that shouldn't exist in nature, 96% pure gold, coming from surface deposits that typically yielded 30% at best. The rush that followed makes the famous 49 Gold Rush look organized by comparison. 5,000 men descended on Wheeler's Canyon within 3 months. Picture this: a narrow canyon system that had been home to maybe 20 people, suddenly hosting a population larger than most established towns. Wheeler faced a choice that would define everything that followed. He could fight the invasion, trying to protect his claims through violence and legal action. Or he could do something unprecedented. Embrace it. Wheeler chose cooperation, but cooperation on his terms. Any miner could work a claim in Wheeler's Canyon system, but all ore processing went through Wheeler's stamps. The prices were fair. Wheeler made his money on volume, not exploitation, but the arrangement gave him control over quality, timing, and market strategy. This cooperative model attracted serious miners while discouraging claim jumpers and troublemakers. Think about it. If you're planning to steal gold, you want chaos and confusion. Wheeler's system provided order, fair dealing, and steady profits for honest work. Criminal elements moved on to easier targets. Sarah Chen arrived in September 48, though calling her just Chen Wei's sister misses the point entirely. Sarah established the Golden Dragon boarding house, but that humble description doesn't capture what she actually created. The Golden Dragon became Wheeler's unofficial intelligence center, diplomatic headquarters, and social laboratory, all in one. Sarah's network was extraordinary. Chinese workers provided labor and technical expertise. Mexican traders brought supplies and market information from throughout the Southwest. European craftsmen contributed specialized skills in metalworking and engineering. The Saturday night dances Sarah organized weren't just entertainment, they were carefully orchestrated meetings where business deals were struck and alliances formed. And here's something that would have been unthinkable in most of America at the time. Marriages began crossing ethnic lines. Chinese men married Mexican women. European craftsmen married into established Californio families. Former slaves married into Ute families who'd moved closer to the canyon for trading opportunities. The Golden Dragon hosted wedding celebrations that created not just romantic partnerships, but business alliances that strengthened Wheeler's entire operation. But Wheeler's success was attracting attention from interests far more dangerous than individual claim jumpers. Corporate mining operations back east had been watching California gold production with growing concern. Independent miners like Wheeler were disrupting established patterns of resource extraction and profit distribution. The first corporate infiltrator arrived in late 1848, claiming to be Wheeler's long-lost cousin. Samuel Morrison, M.I., no relation to Black Tom, M.I., represented the Havisham Mining Consortium of Philadelphia, though he spent 18 months establishing his false identity before revealing his true purpose. Morrison's infiltration was sophisticated by any standard, let alone frontier standards. He sabotaged competitors' claims through carefully orchestrated accidents. He bribed territorial judges to issue favorable rulings for Eastern interests. Most importantly, he documented Wheeler's every strategic move, creating detailed intelligence reports that found their way to corporate boardrooms 3,000 miles away. The chess game was on. Wheeler countered with shell companies of his own, using Chen Wei's international connections to establish mining interests that appeared completely separate from Wheeler's strike, but actually coordinated purchasing and shipping to maximize profits. Wheeler began lobbying territorial legislators, understanding that legal precedents established in California would determine mining law throughout the West. Perhaps most cleverly, Wheeler began manipulating global gold prices through strategic ore shipment delays. When London markets expected major deliveries from California, Wheeler would hold back his highest purity gold, driving prices higher. Then he'd flood the market with premium ore, maximizing profits while destabilizing competitors who couldn't match his quality or timing. By winter of 1849, Wheeler's strike had become something unprecedented in American history, a fully integrated mining operation that transcended every social boundary frontier society considered permanent. Chinese financial expertise, Mexican mining knowledge, African-American engineering innovation, and Native American environmental wisdom combined with Wheeler's strategic vision to create wealth on a scale that attracted national attention. But that level of success also attracted enemies powerful enough to destroy everything Wheeler had built. The Havisham Mining Consortium wasn't just another business competitor. They represented old money, Eastern establishment power, and the kind of institutional connections that could turn federal law enforcement into private security. The storm that was coming would test whether Wheeler's unlikely alliance could survive when faced with enemies who had the resources of the federal government behind them. War was coming to Wheeler's strike, and it would be unlike any conflict the frontier had ever seen. The siege of Wheeler's strike began at dawn on April 15, 1850. And if you want to understand how dramatically the American frontier could explode into violence, this is your case study. Picture the scene. A narrow canyon system in what's now Nevada, about to become the site of a conflict that military historians would later study at West Point, not because it was large, but because it was so tactically sophisticated. Colonel Marcus Havisham arrived with 300 hired guns, federal marshals carrying warrants that looked official enough to fool most territorial judges, and enough legal documents to claim every major strike in Wheeler's Canyon. But Havisham wasn't just another claim jumper with delusions of grandeur. He represented old money, Eastern establishment power, and the kind of institutional resources that could turn frontier disputes into something approaching conventional warfare. Wheeler's citizen militia numbered 800 miners, and that number tells you everything about how dramatically Wheeler's cooperative model had succeeded. These weren't desperate men fighting for survival. They were stakeholders, defending a community that had made them prosperous. The difference in motivation would prove decisive. Black Tom Morrison's engineering genius had transformed Wheeler's Canyon into something approaching a frontier fortress. Water reclamation systems doubled as defensive barriers. Mining tunnels became communication networks. Strategic overlooks that had been established for spotting claim jumpers now served as sniper positions with fields of fire calculated to mathematical precision. Chen Wei's gunpowder expertise, IC, learned from his grandfather's military service in China, created explosive surprises that turned narrow canyon passages into death traps for advancing attackers. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah Chen's intelligence network provided early warning that allowed Wheeler's forces to choose when and where to fight. For 17 days, the siege played out like medieval warfare adapted to American desert terrain. Mirror signals flashed between canyon peaks, coordinating defender movements with precision that amazed observers. Maria Vasquez led night raids that destroyed attacker supply lines, earning her the newspaper nickname Ghost of the Canyon, though Eastern papers were careful not to emphasize that this ghost was a Mexican woman leading Chinese and African-American raiders against white corporate interests. The tactical innovation was extraordinary. Wheeler's defenders used mining equipment as weapons of war. Ore carts became mobile barriers. Steam-powered mining equipment provided covering fire. Most ingeniously, the water systems that made desert mining profitable became defensive tools, flooding attack routes, creating mud barriers, even providing pressurized water cannons that could knock attackers off narrow canyon ledges. But the real turning point came from an unexpected source. Standing Bear's Ute warriors had been watching the siege from the surrounding hills, and their intervention changed everything. Not from any obligation to Wheeler, their debt had been paid years earlier, but from strategic calculation about which outcome best served Ute interests in dealing with inevitable white expansion. The Ute attack on Haversham's rear positions was devastating precisely because it was so unexpected. Haversham's force had prepared for frontier irregulars, not coordinated assault by experienced Native American warriors who knew desert warfare better than anyone. The two-front battle lasted 6 hours, and when it ended, Haversham's siege was broken. Here's what's fascinating about the official records. Federal reports of the Wheelers' strike siege barely mention Native American involvement. The uncomfortable reality that Ute warriors had played a decisive role in defeating what was essentially a corporate-backed military operation didn't fit the narrative that Eastern newspapers wanted to tell about frontier development. Wheeler's victory celebration lasted 3 days, and by all accounts, it was the kind of multicultural festival that wouldn't be seen again in American mining country for decades. Chinese fireworks, Mexican music, African American spirituals, and Ute ceremonial dancing, ATEL, all in celebration of COTE, defending what had become the most successful cooperative mining venture in American history. But Samuel Morrison's betrayal was still to come, and it would prove that Wheeler's greatest enemy wasn't outside corporate interests, but the corruption that success itself had attracted. Morrison had spent 18 months establishing himself as a trusted member of Wheeler's inner circle. His apparent engineering expertise had earned him access to the most sensitive aspects of the mining operation. His false identity as Wheeler's distant cousin had given him social standing that opened doors throughout the community. The poisoned whiskey appeared during the victory celebrations, targeting specifically the leadership that had made Wheeler's success possible. 17 men died before Doc Hanson identified strychnine poisoning, including 3 of Sarah Chen's most trusted lieutenants and 2 of Black Tom Morrison's key engineering assistants. But the poisoning was just Morrison's opening move. While Wheeler's people dealt with the medical crisis, Morrison and his Confederates dynamited the main mine shaft, triggering a collapse that trapped 43 miners in the deepest sections of Wheeler's operation. Now, here's where the story takes its most tragic turn. Wheeler led the rescue efforts for 6 days, working alongside Black Tom Morrison to engineer solutions for reaching the trapped miners. They saved 37 men, but 6 died in secondary collapses before rescue tunnels could reach them. Wheeler disappeared on the night of May 3, 1850. Some witnesses claimed they saw him pursuing Morrison into the desert. Others insisted he simply couldn't bear the weight of men dying for his gold. The truth is probably more complex. Wheeler understood that his presence had become a liability to the community he'd created. Standing Bear's grandson later claimed that Wheeler appeared at the sacred springs where he'd first learned desert survival, carrying detailed maps of undiscovered gold deposits. These maps, according to Ute oral tradition, were Wheeler's final payment for old debts, Yero SA, information about mineral wealth that could be used to negotiate with white authorities for tribal territory protection. What we know for certain is that Wheeler's physical departure marked the beginning of the end for the cooperative model that had made Wheeler's strike unique. Without his strategic vision and diplomatic skills holding together the complex alliance of Chinese merchants, Mexican miners, African American engineers, and Native American allies, the pressures of racial prejudice and economic competition began tearing the community apart. Morrison was never caught, though rumors persisted for years about a mysterious figure manipulating mining claims throughout California and Nevada. The Haversham Consortium eventually acquired controlling interests in most of Wheeler's original claims, though they never matched the production levels achieved under Wheeler's cooperative model. But the real tragedy wasn't economic. It was social. Wheeler's strike had proven that frontier communities could transcend racial boundaries when united by common purpose and fair dealing. The destruction of that experiment wouldn't be replicated until the civil rights movements of the 20th century, nearly 100 years later. The siege of Wheeler's strike was over, but its legacy was just beginning. Because what happened in that narrow canyon system would influence American labor law, mining regulation, and water rights for generations to come. Wheeler himself might have disappeared into legend, but the precedents established by his cooperative community would echo through American legal and social history long after the gold ran out. The question now was whether anything would survive of Wheeler's revolutionary experiment, or whether it would become just another cautionary tale about frontier dreams destroyed by corporate greed and human betrayal. Wheeler's strike died slowly, the way frontier communities usually do, not with dramatic explosions, but with the gradual erosion of hope and opportunity. By 1870, 20 years after the siege that made it famous, only 300 stubborn souls remained in the canyon system that had once hosted 5,000 dreamers. The Morrison dynamiting had done more than kill 6 miners and destroy Wheeler's main shaft. It had destabilized the entire geological foundation of the canyon system. Periodic cave-ins became a fact of life, claiming both lives and gold deposits with terrifying regularity. Insurance companies, ASA, those new financial innovations just reaching the frontier, refused to cover mining operations in what they classified as geologically compromised territory. But some people don't give it up easily. Sarah Chen had married Doc Hansen in 1852, creating what might have been the first Chinese-Irish medical practice in American history. Their daughter, Elizabeth Chen Hansen, would become the first Chinese-American woman admitted to the California bar in 1878, using mining law precedents established in Wheeler's cooperative agreements to argue landmark cases about immigrant rights and labor protections. Think about that for a moment. Legal arguments crafted in a frontier mining camp by a failed Missouri farmer were being cited in San Francisco courtrooms to protect the rights of people Wheeler had never met. The reach of his ideas extended far beyond the gold they'd originally been designed to protect. The ghost stories started almost immediately after Wheeler's disappearance, because frontier communities need their legends, and Wheeler's strike had certainly earned the right to a few supernatural tales. Miners reported seeing a lantern moving through abandoned shafts on moonless nights, always just far enough ahead to follow, never close enough to catch. The Paiute, who had moved in the area after Standing Bear's Ute band withdrew to more defensible territory, spoke of a white-bearded spirit who warned them away from unstable tunnels. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, those warnings apparently saved lives. Tunnel collapses that should have killed dozens somehow claimed remarkably few victims, as if someone with intimate knowledge of the canyon's geology was still protecting the people who called it home. More practically, Wheeler's innovations were revolutionizing American mining throughout the West. His water reclamation systems became standard engineering practice in arid regions from Nevada to Arizona. Black Tom Morrison's hydraulic designs appeared in mining operations from Colorado to Montana, often without credit, but always with results that improved both safety and profitability. The ore processing methods developed by Maria Vasquez increased yields by 30% compared to standard techniques, making marginal claims profitable and rich claims extraordinarily lucrative. Chen Wei's market timing strategies influenced commodity trading patterns that extended from San Francisco to London, proving that frontier innovation could compete with established financial centers. But perhaps Wheeler's most lasting contribution was his labor cooperation model. The precedents established at Wheeler's strike influenced union formation throughout American industry. The idea that workers could be stakeholders rather than just employees, that diverse ethnic groups could collaborate as equals, that fair dealing was more profitable than exploitation, ISTA. These concepts would echo through American labor history for generations. Modern technology hasn't solved Wheeler's final mystery, and that might be the most intriguing part of the entire story. Satellite imaging confirms extensive tunnel systems beneath the official mine locations, tie, chambers and passages that don't match any known mining plans. Ground-penetrating radar suggests spaces that match descriptions in Sarah Chen's diary of Wheeler's deep reserves, but accessing them would require destabilizing an already fragile canyon system. Every summer, descendants of original miners gather at what's now designated Wheeler's Strike National Historical Site. They come from all over America: Chinese-American families from San Francisco, Mexican-American families from throughout the Southwest, African-American families whose ancestors learned engineering from Black Tom Morrison, even a few Ute families whose oral traditions preserve different versions of Wheeler's final disappearance. These families share stories passed down through generations, each claiming unique knowledge about the lost Motherlode's location. A Chinese-American engineer from Los Angeles insists his great-grandfather's maps show chambers filled with gold that Wheeler sealed before disappearing. A Mexican-American mining consultant from Arizona claims her family knows the location of Wheeler's emergency cache, designed to fund reconstruction if the cooperative ever needed to relocate. But here's what's really fascinating about these annual gatherings. They're not just about treasure hunting. These are people whose family histories intersected in Wheeler's Canyon for maybe 5 years, and those brief connections created relationships that have persisted across 5 generations. Intermarriage between families of different ethnic backgrounds, business partnerships that span the continent, educational scholarships funded by descendants of Wheeler's original investors, ACE. The social capital created by Wheeler's experiment has compounded over time in ways that dwarf any gold deposits. Professor Elizabeth Chen Martinez, AMA, Sarah Chen's great-great-granddaughter and current director of archaeological efforts at Wheeler's Strike, AMA, leads research that has uncovered 17 different cultures' artifacts in Wheeler's camps. Chinese pottery sits alongside Mexican silver work and Ute ceremonial objects. African-American craftsmanship appears in tools that show influence from European metalworking traditions. The real treasure, Professor Chen Martinez argues, wasn't gold but proof that frontier communities could transcend racial boundaries when united by common purpose. Wheeler's Strike existed for less than a decade, but it demonstrated possibilities that American society wouldn't seriously explore again until the civil rights movements of the 20th century. Wheeler's true legacy lives not in hidden gold, but in the institutions his experiment created. Labor laws protecting worker safety and ensuring fair wages trace their precedents to agreements hammered out in Wheeler's cooperative. Water rights legislation throughout the American West references engineering standards established by Black Tom Morrison's hydraulic systems. Mining regulations that protect both workers and environments grew from practices developed to manage Wheeler's multi-ethnic workforce. These are monuments more lasting than any fortune, legal and social structures that continue protecting people throughout the American West. When modern mining companies negotiate with Native American tribes, they're following diplomatic precedents established by Wheeler's partnership with Standing Bear. When immigrant workers assert their rights to fair treatment, they're invoking legal principles first articulated in the multicultural camps of Wheeler's Strike. So what happened to James Wheeler? The most likely answer is the simplest. He understood that his personal legend had become larger than his actual contribution, and he chose to step aside so his ideas could survive without the complications of personality and politics. Wheeler's disappearance wasn't a tragic ending, but a strategic withdrawal that allowed his innovations to spread throughout American industry without being tied to any individual's reputation. The failed farmer from Missouri had created something unprecedented in American history, a successful multicultural community based on economic cooperation rather than ethnic competition. When corporate interests and human betrayal destroyed that community, Wheeler's response wasn't to fight for personal glory, but to ensure that his most valuable discoveries, the social and technical innovations that made cooperation profitable, would survive to influence future generations. Every time an American worker benefits from safety regulations, fair wage standards, or environmental protections in mining operations, they're receiving dividends from Wheeler's investment in proving that cooperation works better than exploitation. Every time diverse communities come together to solve common problems, they're following a template established in a narrow Nevada canyon by people who believed that human differences could be sources of strength rather than division. That might be the greatest treasure of all, the proof that even in the most vibrant, competitive, individualistic society in human history, cooperation and mutual respect can create wealth that benefits everyone. Wheeler's Strike may be a ghost town now, but its echoes still resonate through American institutions and communities, reminding us that the best human achievements happen when people choose to work together rather than against each other. The gold ran out long ago, but the ideas that made Wheeler's Strike possible are still paying dividends more than a century and a half later. In a world that often seems divided by the same ethnic and economic tensions that Wheeler's community transcended, that might be the most relevant lesson of all.